It's no secret that Spider-Man No Way Home has emerged to be one of the greatest superhero films to date, bringing back classic Spider-Man film villains, including the Green Goblin, starring Willem Dafoe from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2002. But as the film debuted, it became clear that the Marvel studio was not keen on keeping the classic 2002 Green Goblin that we all knew and loved, deciding to give the character a revamp, including the removal of the iconic mask, as the mask was destroyed early on in the Spider-Man No Way Home movie. Some would argue that the removal of the Green Goblin mask is a fresh breath of life for the character, a fresh take on the character, that the mask was a detriment to the Green Goblin character, and that removing the mask was giving Willem Dafoe a chance to express the Green Goblin through his both scary and frightening facial expressions without the mask. Others would argue that the mask looked terrible and was purely a detriment to the Green Goblin character, preferring a maskless goblin or the animatronic mask that Sam Raimi originally was going to use. While these are points that cannot be disregarded or overlooked, one cannot disregard or even remotely downplay the depth, genius backstory, alluring aesthetic, and quite frankly, the sheer unmatched badassery that the Sam Raimi Green Goblin mask brought us in 2002. Now, ironically, I never heard of any criticisms of the Green Goblin mask until Spider-Man No Way Home launched. Previously, the criticisms were always levied at the Green Menace's outfit. The 2002 Goblin sported an emerald bulletproof metallic armored flight suit developed at Oscorp that was initially designed for military purposes. The suit was created alongside the glider with built-in controls to command the glider remotely. The armored suit appears to be green from head to toe, but it's painted with a flip-flop paint, making the costume shine purple in certain lighting. The criticisms that were so often regurgitated by the costume's foes were often the same phrase that the costume looked like a Power Ranger. The suit has also been characterized by its critics as not being accurate to the comics, as the comic version of Green Goblin sports a more medieval look, sporting bulletproof purple colored chainmail over his green costume, a satchel, a Green Goblin mask coupled with a long purple elf hat, literal pumpkin grenades, and purple elf shoes. Other than these two principal criticisms of the Green Goblin suit, there have been very few substantial criticisms levied at the Green Menace's 2002 costume. It wasn't until No Way Home that I began to see criticisms of the mask itself, saying that it was static, didn't fulfill the Goblin spirit, and was an impediment to the Green Goblin character. As time went on, the costume's critics continued to levy the criticisms at the costume, hoping that if he ever returned, his suit would get some much needed changes that they had desired. Spider-Man No Way Home brought us the return of Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin after a 20-year hiatus. The 2002 Goblin made his first appearance in the second trailer of the movie. His first brief appearance, sporting his iconic 2002 costume alone, was enough to create immense hype around the character, making every single YouTube reactor lose it upon seeing him.
Nigga! Yes!
Ooh, yes.
Oh!
That's yes!
That's what, yep.
You want
Willem
the
Dafoe.
world. Try anything you want.
Here we go!
You want
It's really good!
have everything you want while the world tries to make you choose.
I'm so happy for Goblin!
But despite being used in the vast majority of the movie's promotion, the original 2002 Green Goblin was seldom seen in Marvel's 2021 holiday release movie. In fact, there was really only 2 scenes in which the 2002 Goblin was seen, none of which were action sequences, disappointing many fans, myself included. The 2002 mask was destroyed early on in the movie, being replaced by a battle-damaged hoodie that Osborn wore in the movie and a set of goggles? Norman Osborn with goggles was now the new face of the Green Goblin. The original suit itself was later shown to be moderately altered, adding a combination of different shades of green, a brown satchel, parts of a purple sweater that Osborn wore, and some other unexplained additions to the costume, making the costume in some ways a little bit more bulky and giving the costume a bit of a post-apocalyptic feel to it. With all the changes and alterations made to the suit and costume overall, none stood out or rubbed me the wrong way than the removal of the Green Goblin mask, as it was the bread and butter of that entire costume. Villains wear masks for a multitude multitude of reasons to distinguish themselves from heroes, to maintain anonymity and mysteriousness. Villains also wear masks to frighten their enemies, as well as hiding any expression from those they wish to victimize, as people fear what they don't know, what they can't see. A mask is there to augment terror, to strike fear in the hearts of their opponents, to intimidate their adversaries, and to give a face to their alter ego. Masks fulfill the villain persona. With masks bringing all of these functions, there is no doubt whatsoever that masks also bring about a sheer level of trembling badassery to their characters. While there are many villains through the different universes that work fine without masks, most villains just would not be the same without their masks. Darth Vader would never be Darth Vader without his badass iconic mask. Deathstroke, although a badass with or without his mask, would never be the character we know and love without his striking mask. Boba Fett, the resilient bounty hunter, has always been an icon for not only the role his character fulfills, but also the look of his kick-ass mask. Despite his chilling persona and his thirst to kill, if we took away Halloween classic villain Jason Voorhees' mask, the character would never strike the terror into his victims' hearts the same way as he did when he wore the mask. All of this applies to every masked villain: Bane, Scarecrow, Doctor Doom, even Green Goblin himself. I could go down the list. Masks enhance a villain's persona, and even if a villain doesn't wear a mask would absolutely enhance them in ways never thought before. What if Venom or Carnage walked around maskless and never ever walked around with their symbiotes covering their faces? Masks enhance and fulfill the villain persona, full stop, without a doubt. The 2002 Green Goblin mask went through many conceptual designs before the casting of Willem Dafoe. Many of the concept images never made it to the physical world, but before Sony settled on the Green Goblin mask we know and love today, the studio nearly settled on this mask here. It was as close to the comics than anything we've seen today, and it certainly brought the creepy aspect of the Goblin to life. This animatronic mask would have completely covered Dafoe's face and would mimic facial expressions made under the mask. The mask looked amazingly freaky, and I certainly would have loved to see this thing on the big screen. Nonetheless, as cool as this mask is, this mask was unfortunately scrapped, as Sam Raimi himself didn't believe in the believability of the mask, and Sony executives found the mask too unsettling for their target audience, and they scrapped it before Willem Dafoe was cast, opting with the 2002 Green Goblin mask that we got. The Green Goblin mask briefly returned in No Way Home, looking just as dazzling as it did when it left us. In fact, looking somewhat better, despite probably being entirely CGI in every single shot that we saw it in. The only thing as important as the sinister look behind a villain's mask is the story behind it. Whether or not a mask makes sense in a universe is important because it brings a level of realism to it and the villain. It is extremely clear that throughout the Raimi trilogy, particularly the first movie, Norman Osborn's character has a fascination of masks. The movie shows an array of African tribal masks set up throughout his mansion, giving his mansion a really creepy vibe to it. African tribal masks were worn for a variety of different purposes, one of which being to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. This makes the Goblin mask that we got far more believable than Norman Osborn randomly creating a skin-tight Goblin mask. The mask we got resembles the tribal mask in Norman's home. Its frightening Green Goblin-y complexion, sinister grin, cackling face, and horribly golden yellow eyes are truly unsettling to say the least. If Norman wanted to horrify his opponents before killing them, or even if he doesn't want to kill them, this mask will sure enough send a lasting shiver down your spine. One of the things that makes the mask just so amazing is the threatening nature of it. The static, eerie grin on the mask gives the wearer absolute control over how his enemies feel, absolute fear and terror. The eyes on the mask are something out of a nightmare, particularly when you notice how much they glow and reflect, preventing the victim from being able to see the wearer's eyes and instead just see themselves in the reflection. Very chilling. Not to mention that the mask itself is just peak badassery and an absolute work of art. The mask was something that no opponent of the Goblin would ever forget, and they never ceased to recognize the Goblin by the haunting feeling of his haunting, possessing mask. His mask in 2002 had purpose, and it serves its purpose well. Making the Goblin maskless is a crime against the spirit of the character. The Goblin mask that we got fits his character character and is very frightening and also very believable to the story. Critics unsatisfied by the original Goblin suit now praise Spider-Man No Way Home for doing a bit of an overhaul of the costume, and even absurdly going so far as to say that the newer costume, specifically the removal of the mask, is more comic book accurate. But what exactly do they mean by comic book accurate? The costume doesn't look remotely comic book accurate. Comic book movies are never supposed to copy the source material verbatim, but instead diverge from the source material based on the world that they intend to create within the movie. Movies are just different versions of the comic books. They aren't supposed to be a one-to-one transfer. Is there not supposed to be variants of characters throughout movies in different mediums? That's why it makes no sense when people say the new Green Goblin design is comic book accurate, because comic book accuracy doesn't dictate how good or bad a character or their attributes are. In what iteration does the Green Goblin not wear a mask or opt for goggles instead? Why wasn't Ultimate Green Goblin, who is just a giant monster goblin, criticized as not comic book accurate to the original Green Goblin? Does Ultimate Green Goblin have to look exactly like the Goblin in the original Amazing Spider-Man comics, or are the artists allowed to only diverge from the character's appearance in other comics and not movies? Would the Ultimate Green Goblin have to appear on the big screen in order to be criticized as not comic book accurate? I understand that comics are the source material for these Marvel movies. Would Sam Raimi or some other artist have to create a comic book version of this Green Goblin first before they could translate him to the big screen? The whole idea of demanding things to be one-to-one accurate to the comics is irrational and absurd. If you don't appreciate the storytelling in the universe of Raimi's Goblin, why not just say that instead of coming up with the old absurd, not comic book accurate or Power Ranger phrases? I don't particularly care for the comic book accuracy argument because I don't think it's the only way to portray a character, let alone judge a movie's character, but I wanted to point out the absurd hypocrisy of some of the Goblin critics. As long as a character fulfills the spirit and fulfills the overall look of a character, as long as those things are explained in a thorough and a well thought out backstory or plot. Let's not gloss over the ridiculous reactions some moviegoers have to the Sam Raimi films simply because those movies are the way that they are. Some people pretend the Green Goblin is immediately better simply because he's part of the MCU now instead of just the Raimi verse. Let's not forget how absurd people act on the internet by pretending that they like the Raimi Goblin now simply because he has stupid goggles over his eyes instead of a mask. One of the most absurd takes that I hear constantly repeated on the internet is that Willem Dafoe's actual face is the Green Goblin. Certainly one of the dumbest takes that I've heard on the internet in a while. The same people who say that the No Way Home suit is comic book accurate are the same people that say that Willem Dafoe's actual facial expressions are the Green Goblin, when there is no point in Green Goblin comic book history of Norman Osborn going maskless. The completely absurd argument is that Willem Dafoe's face is so scary and so expressive that it is enough to be the Green Goblin itself. This argument is so absurd, it's the equivalent of saying that Robert Pattinson's Batman should get rid of his mask because his face is intimidating enough to scare his enemies. It's stupid and patently absurd. I'm also aware that a portion of people just want to downplay the Raimi movies just because they feel like it and will say absurd things like Willem Dafoe's costume, and even goes so far as to say that his fantastic performance in No Way Home is actually better than his outstanding performance in the 2002 Spider-Man movie. Disturbingly silly comment to make. Comically ridiculous.
I offered you friendship, and you spat in my face.
So how would I have liked them to do the green flying elf's costume in Spider-Man No Way Home? Could I meet these people who oppose the Goblin mask / the OG costume in the middle? Well, not really, as the mask of the Green Goblin from 2002 is absolutely stellar and I wouldn't ever scrap it. However, there are a few ways that I would approach an improvement to the costume itself. The first approach that I would take would be to keep the original costume, as the costume had significance in the Raimi verse as being part of an Oscorp warfare armor, and just give the Goblin a purple tattered cloak and hood as well as the satchel. It would be the bare minimum that I would do to the Goblin suit, and I would still be beyond amazed if this was the route that they took. The second approach that I would take to improve the Goblin suit would be to take the Goblin suit that we got in No Way Home and just give him his mask back, as well as a cape. This is an edit that I created a while ago and posted on Reddit. I don't have the best Photoshop's capabilities, but this is certainly a look that I would have easily enjoyed. The ears poke out from under the hood, and I think it looks amazing. If you would like like to see the full post on Reddit, I will have links in the description for you to check out. This is certainly my second favorite look that I would have absolutely loved if they had gone this route in No Way Home. The final and the absolute favorite approach that I would take would be to actually take more of a Halloween/horror approach. This was made by a Reddit user 2 years ago and is by far my favorite redesign of the costume and one that I would have adored to the extreme. It's a bit of a Hobgoblin-esque type of look, with the colors of the suit toned to be more pastel/dark. The Goblin would break the mask similar to how he did in the No Way Home dumpster scene, but instantly regretting it, fixing it back on his face, leaving the mask cracked and broken in half. The eyes are a brownish yellow color with a spiral pattern that would freak out anyone beyond belief. A dark purple tattered cloak and hood with the same suit underneath, just a different shade of green. The eyes would poke from under the hood in the most sinister way, giving this Goblin the perfect Halloween look. I absolutely adore this version of the Goblin, and if I was making No Way Home, I would absolutely make this his costume without a question, as it's the best compromise to make the Goblin look his absolute best. If I ever create my own Green Goblin cosplay, this is exactly the kind of costume that I would create, and this is exactly what I would want the Green Goblin to look like. All in all, the Green Goblin 2002 mask is one of the best masks in villain history. His mask, along with Willem Dafoe's portrayal of the masked Goblin alone, created one of the most sinister looks, as well as one of the most intimidating villains in MCU history. His mask turned an otherwise standard military glider suit into an absolute teched out suit of badassery and a menace to society. Truly a work of art. That's going to be it of this video, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around this long. Let me know what you think about the original Goblin helmet from 2002, and which one of these compromises would you take? Would it be compromise 1, compromise 2, or compromise 3? Let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and peace out. Or should I say, out am I?